Labour have come out with a bit of a joust against the big house bashers. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading here just to bring everyone up to speed who's listening. So Keir Starmer posted this on his LinkedIn, and it's all gone across the media. So large housing sites can take at least 14 years to build, meaning working families and young people spend years deprived of home ownership. This is my message to house builders. Get on with it. My government has taken radical action to overhaul the planning system and get Britain building again as part of our plan for change to build 1.5 million homes. Now, developers must roll up their sleeves and play their part. It's unacceptable that sites with planning permission gather dust for decades while a generation struggle to get on the housing ladder. So, we're announcing new measures to make sure developers build the homes they promised. For the first time, house builders will have to commit to delivery timeframes before they get planning permission. Councils will get new powers to keep house builders on track. Those deliberately sitting on vital land without building the homes promised could see their sites acquired by councils where there is a case in the public interest and stripped of future planning permission. Quite a threat there. It's quite a threat. And I'm interested to see what you guys think. I think, Dorian, I don't know if this actually starts to affect you.
From our point of view, I'll be honest with you, we don't really have had any sites that we have permission on that we're not actively pushing to build on. In fact, we obviously have some sites right now that have planning permission that we can't build. And that's just because we're waiting just to get into contract. And frustratingly, but as the developer, I am pushing and kicking to try to get onto site to start building. So this doesn't really have any impact to me, I don't think, because I just can't see us being in a position where we're going to bank a planning permission and not build it, or choose not to build it for what we do anyway. I can see though why the problem you have with house building is that, like we've talked about before, if the market's shit, why would you build when you can't sell? You know, why it's do you know what I mean? It's and also it's how they calculate it, because you might have a site that's got permission for 300 homes. But you can't build 300 homes all simultaneously. It happens in phases. So it just depends how they're. But I am in favour if there genuinely is sites out there with planning permission that maybe no one's building them and the vendors refusing to sell them because of aspirations. I agree. I think they should be penalised. Puts more pressure on getting those plots sold to another builder who will actually build them. But from me as an SME developer, I don't think this has any impact on me whatsoever, unless I'm really oversimplifying it.
So hang on just 1 second. There's direct and indirect impact, right? So direct impact is you and your sites and you commencing on your sites for those reasons. And I completely agree with you. I'm in the same boat, Dorian, that it doesn't directly impact you. But what's the indirect implication of a national home builder now not being able to land bank? You know, like the Berkeley groups have probably got enough land for 50. If they didn't do any single planning application from today onwards, they could probably still keep developing for 15 plus years. What is that indirect impact to us in the industry, because they are direct competition?
So when I think two things are going to happen. As you all know, there's these tools in the planning system, and it all comes down to the definition. You could get planning permission, but it might not be implementable, and a house builder may just play the game on delaying how until it becomes implementable, so the clock starts ticking. I don't exactly know how they're going to. All of this comes in the detail. From that statement there, I can't measure the impact it's going to have, because there just isn't enough detail on when what the penalty is, when does the penalty come into play, what the exclusions from that penalty, and people are just going to dance in that game. Like we've got a site right now, literally in a different game, where we've got planning permission for it, subject to signing the 106, and we are tactfully, maybe I shouldn't put this on recording, but delaying the signing of the section 106. Not necessarily because we don't want to build it, but for a secondary issue. Like we don't want a clock ticking on our contract position. And by the way, whilst I put it out there is genuinely issues with our 106 that need negotiating, and that negotiation we expect is going to take a few months. But hopefully, indirectly, I would hope that it has a positive impact for us SMEs, because if what I'm seeing, not necessarily obviously they've got the larger house builders, but I want this to actually expand into vendors that are just sitting on land that's got permission because they are holding out for a higher price.
When you say vendors, are you talking about national home builders or landowners?
Well, both, because national house builders do sell off parcels of land that's a bit too small for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few. I don't actually know the stat. I'd say there's very few landowners that are sat on land, in my opinion, because they've normally gone for a promote structure for a land promoter, which has to crystallise a sale for the promoter to get paid, or they're being bought out by a national home.
Yeah, look, I mean, from our experiences, it is also in the few. But as a developer, you only need one site. That one of those sites, are 8 figure sites. But yeah, like there's not tons of them. I just can't from an SME development point of view. Even if I can't see what massive impact it's going to have on us personally.
I just want to touch on one thing as well, just for our viewers' benefit also, who maybe some people aren't too attuned to how these big boys work with their land banking and having this huge kind of runway of pipeline. But one of the reasons, the government's obviously throwing out political bullshit here, but I'm sure they'll do something stupid and try and apply pressure on these big boys. But if you just think about it from a common sense perspective, these big boys have so much data on what's happening in the market and sales and saturation levels and things like that. There's a reason they don't force through and try and sell and develop all of their pipeline at any given at one time, regardless of what the country needs, because it's what people can actually buy, pay for, and afford in that given area at that time. They can't just go, here's 1,000 houses because the government forced it. They might want to stagger it and go, here's 200 this year, 200 the next year, 200 the year after, to stabilize their sales rate.
It's not just so the sales rate is definitely a big factor, but it's also the time it takes to get permission. So the problem they got is that as a house builder, if it takes you, I'm going to simplify this, but if it takes you on average 4 years to get a site from start to legally being able to build, start commencement of build, you should have a 4-year land bank, very high level, because you're going to run out. The problem is if that relationship becomes inverse and they're building faster than the permissions rates coming through, then they can't scale the risk of scaling becomes massive, and then risk of redundancies because of timing issues and borrowing and just massive getting slammed by the public markets, because these are public companies and they want consistent results, ideally consistent growing results. If you get a bit of a wobble because you've built faster than the next permissions come in, like SME developers experience, like I literally had a conversation with one of my fellow investors yesterday about a site that should have sold, hasn't sold, because we're waiting on a piece of information from the council.
Sorry, just to touch off on that, Jack, just before I move on to it. So you're saying, as well as there being this potential saturation issue that could massively impact the sales values they can get if they're just to drop everything at once, they're also then potentially putting in jeopardy their future pipeline because their sales rate is outstripping the pipeline that they're preparing. So they're forecasting and going, can't do that.
All national home builders that sell, it's the ultimate speed of everything is on the sales rate, which Dorian talked about. So like an analogy is the sales rate is the bottom of a funnel, and if the liquid or let's say you're using sand, like a sand timer, if the sand timer, which is planning applications and delivery, is less than the sales rate, there's no point in pouring more into the funnel because it costs money, right? So they're always trying to balance that exit. But what I find interesting, and I don't know if it would be good to get everyone else's views. I don't know if you guys can record it, but it was probably, I would have said probably in the first dozen episodes that we recorded, we talked about the Berkeley Group potentially going into build to rent market. And that is because as a national home developer that exits on the market, they're constantly governed by sales rates. And then they have to work back through construction, borrowing the debt, so that obviously a development company doesn't ever want to build out all of its units and be carrying debt on all of its units if they're not getting sold quick enough. They can keep their debt down by building out what's required in those local regions and areas strategically, again, like the funnel scenario. But if you go into build to rent, you could rent your building out in months. And you could develop out those sites across the course, because the demand for rent is increasing. The average age of a buyer, which we talked about in the last episode, is going up, and we may see more of that. But I still can't see the financial markets warranting renting, because the yields, especially around down south, just don't stack up.
I've stayed quiet for that bit because I wanted to hear your opinion, because I don't really want to do ground up or new build sites for that exact reason. I think it's typical Labour getting involved, throwing threats around, where they should just stay out of the free market. How would they implement it? Are they going to implement it on outline planning? If you reapply for planning to change the scheme to better it, when is that going to actually trigger?
Can I just quickly say one thing, Stuart, and I'll let you carry on. There is news in the market of Labour government trying to also support SME housing developers. So
that's where they should be spending their time. They should be trying to fix the actual physical problem, because they're not. They're just throwing threats around. You just get on with it. But there's enough risk for SME builders, and for there's so much risk that people don't take into account when they're trying to throw threats around. And it's just exactly all the costs and stuff. Who wants to sit on a bit of land if you're in a promote or you're borrowing money? You want to get on with it, but it just frustrates me really that you just can't get on with it. I had some notes here, but I forgot what they meant now. But yeah, I don't do new build. I'd much rather get on with fucking. I was writing it down as you lot were talking. I was like, I got 7 points and I can't read my handwriting. I was like, oh shit, like a doctor's note. But yeah, it's just frustrating that they get involved. Just fucking fix the actual problem, which is the planning system, and just let everyone get on with it.
Yeah, amen.
I still think there's two different hats here. There's the national PLC, which I think does impact them, and then there's SMEs, and I don't think this impacts us as much. But playing devil's advocate, obviously, I'm always of the opinion that the government do have a lot of data that we don't probably know from a public point of view. So part of me thinks that this has come out because they have genuine data that's showing that there is genuine strategic hoarding of land from a national scale of PLC level. And if that's the case, and they don't want that to happen, then I'm not against that either. I just think all of this comes back down to the detail, is that sales rates and market finance appetite and market risk and the planning timescale, they are massive, and that's why there needs to be a land bank of X years. Otherwise, the whole system will crumble. It wouldn't work. I'm sure I read in Barrett's annual report, it takes them on average 8 years from identifying a site and taking it through. I could be wrong there, but like 8 years. 8 years, like fuck me. So Barrett operate on a massive scale there.
Well, D, if you're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt, I'm gonna be more cynical and put my small conspiracy hat on. If we look at everything Labour's done so far, they seem to be squashing out small businesses and helping the multinationals. Look what they've done on the farming side of things, on what they've done to small businesses already with the tax increases, the zero-hour contracts, all those other things. Everything they've done has not helped small businesses. So, and they always say, with government, when they say they're doing something positive here, particularly if it's helping the small guy, well, what are they doing over here? And to me, the big push that seems to be happening is, where's the lowest cost of capital? They usually dictate the market. And when you look at the Blackstones, the Granger Groups, the John Lewis and Partners, etc., they're focused on these build-to-rent models. Jack touched on something interesting, that if you are to force big boys into delivering stock, it's much more feasible for them to do that through build-to-rent if they've got a cheap cost of capital that's happy to take the yields. But it looks like the market's already saying it's going to do that. And we did an episode on this. So I feel there could be something like, they're pushing for the build-to-rent sector to get on, to fire up and get going quicker through enacting policy that stops these land bankers from being able to churn out the stock in the traditional way they've done so, and allow this kind of new money to come in to just slap up as much build-to-rent as possible. And in doing so, they're going, but don't worry, SMEs, we're going to help you. And then on the other hand, they're over-regulating the sector so much that it's not helping us, and the cost of capital we can't compete with when it comes to Blackstone and their source of funds. So I do think we kind of got to be careful of what they say here, read between the lines of, they say one thing here, but they're probably doing something else over there that we're not aware of, and that's very government to do. Every week, all four of us get around a mic, talk about property and business, so make sure you go subscribe to the Ground Up Podcast.